Pagoda Hill, Chapter 58. On the north end of town, overlooking the marketplace, stood Pagoda Hill, named for the Thain Town Pagoda and monastery that was situated at the top. Access to the pagoda was by climbing a series of steps that began about halfway up the hill from a road which wound its way for a short stretch along the side of the hill and then ran down all the way to the marketplace. On either side of the road stood two-story houses and bungalows that now, after the war, were in various states of disrepair. The gardens were maintained with minimal care, and those who had stayed or returned lacked the resources they had earlier possessed to care for them. Some of the owners never retook possession of their properties, and may in fact have died leaving no record verifying their ownership, as many of the official records had been destroyed. Included among the people who lived in the homes on Pagoda Hill were the Tranters, mentioned earlier, and opposite them across the road lived the Durhams. This family was made up mostly of boys, Willie, Stanley, Vernon, and I think that perhaps they had a sister, but I never saw her. Further down the road were the families of other Khans, the Afghan Khans and another family of Khans, Willie, John, and Sheila Khan, who lived with their parents, like so many others, in a house made of bamboo which had been built over a bombed-out building where only the concrete foundation remained. John's real name was John, and even that, I assume, was an abbreviation or pet name, whereas Willie, I never knew what his real name was. Their father was either Pathan or Hindustani, while their mother was of mixed Burmese and Indian ancestry. They had a younger sister, Sheila, who still lives in Kalor, in the same house up on Pagoda Hill. John Khan was the one who was in my class in school, and therefore was also taught by Miss Pearl, who after a failure of running her own private school, began teaching at the convent. John had an allergy of some sort, or a cold one day, and this caused him to have a runny nose. It so happened that that very afternoon, Miss Pearl asked him to bring his exercise book up to her desk so that she could mark his work. As she studied his work, he stood sniffling beside her desk, watching her. She suddenly turned on him and said, "Use your handkerchief. I'm afraid it's going to fall on me." That set the class into a fit of suppressed laughter, to John's utter humiliation and embarrassment. Up on the same hill lived the Afghani Khans. Prior to coming to Burma, life had been good for the family of Yasin Khan. They were part of the elite in Afghanistan and within the circle of the king's ambit. However, early in the 20th century, when years of turmoil culminated in some rather drastic changes that threatened their very lives, they began contemplating the need to leave their beloved homeland in Afghanistan. Yasin Khan's mother was first cousin to the Queen, Sarwar Sultana, and his father had been Minister of Trade while he himself held a ministerial position in the government. The king of Afghanistan at the time was Amanullah, and his efforts at reform, along lines similar to that of Ataturk of Turkey, encouraging women to go unveiled and men to wear Western dress, resulted in him being ousted, and he was forced into exile in 1928. Yasin Khan's position became tenuous, and the final nudge came with the implementation of Sharia law under the Islah of Kabul. The king's failed attempt at regaining the throne put those under his wing in jeopardy, and in 1932, Yasin Khan, together with his wife and 3-year-old son Nasim, fled to Burma and settled in Kalor. Yasin Khan was, from my perspective as a child, a tall, ferocious-looking man with a shock of straight black hair, strangely intimidating, and I intended to keep my distance from him, though I loved his wife, whom to us was Mrs. Khan, but was referred to by her children as Bobo, and someone later told me her name was Bobo Gul. We never knew her name and simply called her Auntie, as we did all the ladies who were around my mother's age. We also addressed the male friends and acquaintances of my father as uncle, following the Eastern tradition of respect for elders in our community. We recognized Mrs. Khan by her elegant dresses, her stylish shoes, and her makeup. She wore bright red lipsticks and pink rouge, which we were quite unaccustomed to, since our mother, as well as all of our female relatives, never used any. She had puffy, reddish-brown, shoulder-length hair and spoke with dramatized facial expressions, while the tone of her husky voice and her Pashto accent gave it a specially intriguing quality. Talk was generally about all the other families in the small, non-indigenous community, and more often than not, about the Iranian Shirazi families with whom Mrs. Khan was in close contact, while my mother was not. It's strange how under the mask of a foreign culture, I could see no difference in the social exchange between my mother and Mrs. Khan and that of two women in the heart of a rural village in Afghanistan or anywhere else in the world. The superficial layers of disguise we attempt to impose upon people do not change the inherent basic patterns of human interaction. I enjoyed Mrs. Khan's visits, especially when we first returned to Kalor, and she would call on us, bringing with her her pretty green-eyed daughter Farida, who was born probably around the time of the first Japanese invasion into Burma, about the same age as my younger sister Bilkis. Mrs. Khan always greeted us with genuine warmth, and her conversation was always interesting, not because I understood or cared to know what she was discussing with my mother, but because of the way she expressed what she said. She contoured her lips around each word and enunciated it like it was a tasty morsel, raising her eyebrows, furrowing her forehead, or rolling her eyes for emphasis. She would drop her voice to a hushed whisper, denoting either the secrecy or special privilege she was granting my mother by allowing her to be privy to some very special piece of information. This particular Khan family lived for a while in a haunted house on Pagoda Hill, and the stories about strange encounters there magnified with each episode as it was told and retold. But more macabre still was what took place in Ridge House when they relocated there later on. This was a large 2-story house, and I visited them there one winter morning. By then, the family had grown, with 2 more sons, Ehsan and Shawali, and 2 daughters, Farida and the youngest, Shahida. Shawali, or Charlie, became a great friend of my brother Arthur, and the 2 of them got up to all kinds of pranks. In Kalor, people just dropped in on each other. There were perhaps only 2 telephones in the whole town, and the one we had was for such a short time that I only have a vague recollection of it resting on a small table in the corner of the dining room, and of it having been strongly condemned by the Maulvi. That winter morning, when I visited the Yasin Khan family, I arrived unannounced, entering the house by climbing the wooden stairs that rose up along the outer wall. The family occupied the upper floor of the house, and my knocking on the door was answered by Mrs. Khan, who welcomed me into the large living room. The morning light filtered in dimly through the curtained windows, and there was a faint aroma of many bodies having recently slept in that area. The floor was draped in a circle of quilts, which radiated from a central point in the middle of the room, where a sigri or kursi of hot coals covered with a layer of ash had been placed. The multicolored patterned quilts were raised up above the brazier on the backs of chairs, and I could see that the family had slept on the floor the previous night, their heads on pillows which lay on the outer rim of the circle, and their feet close to the warmth of the kursi in the center. This was similar to the kotatsu of Japan, and a typical custom in Afghanistan for keeping warm in winter. The ground floor of the house was occupied by Munshiji and his extended family, around whom much of the gossip in the town revolved. This became especially so at our house if Marjane Khala, my mother's cousin, was visiting us. Then everyone became fair game. Those who are prone to habitually engage in the exercise of gossiping accomplish it with great relish. There is the rolling of eyes to indicate horror at generally some woman's and less often some man's behavior. There is the downward turning of the corners of the mouth to signify disgust, and the gossiper's overall state of malicious satisfaction that the maximum amount of damage has been done to the victim's reputation. There seems to be a price to pay for the sadistic nature of this pastime, because over time, the prettiest of faces get etched with the lines of mean expressions and turns ugly. The gossip in Kalor had, for a short while, revolved around the daughters of the Hussein family, who also lived on Pagoda Hill. The girls ranged in age from 15 to 25, and for all of them, nature had selected the best genes from both the Iranian father and the Shan mother. The most attractive of all was Beryl, who was probably about 18 or 19 at the time. She became the source of much gossip when their neighbor, the chubby young Sikh gentleman Jok Singh, became enamored with her, and it was rumored that they were sweethearts. The talk stopped short when Beryl, to the consternation of the gossipers, married a boy from Rangoon who happened to be the son of the wealthy owner of the Kalor Hotel. About the same time, there arrived from India the charming, lovely new wife of Jok Singh, who turned heads as she walked down the hill, dressed in beautifully matched Punjabi outfits, her long black hair combed into a thick braid that hung down her back. She was soon enlisted as a teacher in Kingswood School, and unbeknown to me, became the jealous target of plump, inelegant Miss Pearl, my teacher at the convent. I inadvertently caught the ire and wrath of the latter when I gave Jock's wife my geography notes that had been dictated to me by Miss Pearl. It's strange that I don't remember her name now, but then I loved the sweetness with which she talked with me, the slightly husky voice, and a fluency in English. It wasn't long before they had a little boy, and I would visit her after school and watch while she made sugar parathas for him. The main focus of gossip, however, was more often Hajra, the pretty young daughter of Munshiji, another Pathan, was an innocuous little man, quiet and gentle in nature, who had married a Zarbadi lady. Hajra, according to her own statement to my mother, was happily married, saying, मैंने तो मेरा शौहर को मोहब्बत का हंडी भर के ढकना बंद करके दिया है. In other words, I have given my husband a large pot full of my love and closed the lid. She had 2 young daughters of her own, but that didn't stop the gossip, which blew sky high after the incident between Yasin Khan and Munshiji. One story was that it had nothing to do with Hajra, and that it was her mother, in fact, who was the cause of the problem. It was rumored that the mother was in the habit of having affairs with various men, and that Yasin Khan was very embarrassed by this. He was ashamed of the fact that Munshiji, who was also Pathan like himself, was not controlling his wife. But this version of the reason for what happened appeared to be mere conjecture. The story I heard from John David, the youngest son of the South Indian Christian family who lived next door, was that it happened while Mrs. Khan was away in Rangoon with her daughters. We all knew Yasin Khan to be a religiously devout man. He prayed 5 times a day and always went to the mosque on Fridays. I knew this because invariably, on his way back from the mosque at the bottom of the hill, which was just a short walk from our house, he would stop in and chat with my mother. I remember Robert Tranter, who was a year younger than I was, telling me as we played by the front gate of our house, "Look at that Mr. Khan. He's sitting in your mother's chair," implying that he had the audacity to sit in the chair that my mother usually sat in. From here, our mother could watch us at play and also view the beautiful flowers that grew in concentric circles around the fountain. As the spout turned, water spurted out and sprinkled glistening drops over the garden in huge spiral sprays, creating rainbows and tipping down onto the bright orange petals of the poppies, silvering their serrated seed heads and furry stems. The spray spun wide, encompassing snapdragons, zinnias, sweet peas, chrysanthemums, and larkspur, and spilling over the half bricks that jutted out in triangles, edging the flower beds, and in its orbit, wetting the deep crimson faces of the large dahlias, which vied in their coloring with the deeper red of the giant gladioli. An endless range of flowers, scenting my world with sheer magic, so that when I dream of heaven now, I see it filled with the flowers of Kalor. That particular day, Yasin Khan stood on the Janamaz as usual at Zohar, the time for prayer shortly after noon. He raised his arms, saying, "Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest." Then, folding his hands across his abdomen, he recited, "Subhanakallahumma, all glory be to God and praise," and continued in Arabic with the salutations before reciting the first surah of the Quran. "All praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds, the beneficent, the merciful, owner of the day of judgment. You alone we worship. You alone we ask for help. Guide us to the right path, the path of those upon you have granted grace, not the path of those who go astray." He then recited the last surah of the Quran, "Qul a'udhu bi rabbin nas." I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind, the ruler of mankind, the God of mankind, from the mischief of the whisperer of evil, who withdraws after whispering into the hearts of the jinn and mankind. He repeated the Arabic words that he had been taught as a child, bowing and prostrating with agility, humbling himself before the Creator. But while he carried out the rituals of prayer, his inner voice spoke other lines, so that while he made the motions of prayer, his mind, fueled by much anger and hatred, failed to be altered by his calisthenics. Unlike those who remain in prayer, irrespective of their location or the position of their bodies, his mind raced on, enacting the details of what he was going to do next. Had prayer simply become a habit for him? Was it similar to the acts of young children who feel they must perform certain movements, like not stepping on cracks, or who create some self-imposed rule breaking which they believe will cause something bad to happen? Was it this rather than a conscious effort to focus and align himself with all that was powerful and good? What rationalization and justification prompted him to move in the direction of the knife that lay on a small shelf in the kitchen and pick it up? In the meantime, on the ground floor of the house, the early afternoon sun's rays glanced off the wavy white hair on the head and beard of Munshiji, setting it off like a halo as he rocked his baby grandchild to sleep. He was contemplating laying her down in the makeshift cradle when he heard the heavy footsteps of his neighbor rapidly descending the stairs. Munshiji's heartbeat quickened as he paused and, straightening his bent back, looked up. For a brief moment, his soft brown eyes met the blazing dark eyes of Yasin Khan before the knife plunged and plunged again into him, obliterating all his senses. Sentenced to life imprisonment, Yasin Khan continued to pray, and many questions remain unanswered, like his reason for killing Munshiji. Did he then pray with repentance? Did he then connect with God? Perhaps his prayers were answered, because a relatively short time later, in a magnanimous gesture of Buddhist goodwill or an expedient political maneuver, Prime Minister UNU declared a general amnesty for all prisoners in Burma, and Yasin Khan was released. Is there always this battle within us to be in harmony, the right and left halves of us asymmetrical, and the good and evil in us suspended precariously in a chaos of hormones and chemicals? Who knows what compels and tips the balance one way or another?